Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of Cannabis CMO. On today's show, I'm really excited to talk with Joe Hodas, who was the former CMO, but now the president at Wana Brands. He's going to be taking over as the CEO. Nancy Whiteman steps away, and we're really excited to talk to him about that transition. We're also talking about the breaking news that happened just a couple of days before we recorded this last week about the Biden administration, his DEA deciding that they are going to take HHS's recommendations and move cannabis to a Schedule 3 drug. For many people who may have been following along, that means that 280E is no longer going to be a factor. So we talk with him about what that means for marketers and what to expect in the coming months ahead, as well as talking a little bit about Budtenders. They're the first line of defense at a dispensary, and for many brands, they're the way that you end up getting selected by a customer. So we talk a little bit about the importance of educating budtenders and working with budtenders and really trying to influence budtenders so that they can help influence the sales specifically for your brand. We also talk a little bit about the future of cannabis marketing, and specifically about AI and what AI can mean for marketers going forward, how to make yourself a more efficient marketer, and more specifically, how to make sure that you are not being left out of this AI revolution that is definitely coming down the line. So really excited about today's show. Appreciate you tuning in, and we'll go ahead and get it kicked off with our interview with Joe Hodas. Thank you for watching Cannabis CMO, presented by New Frontier Data. New Frontier Data is the premier data analytics and technology firm specializing in the global cannabis industry, delivering solutions that enable investors, operators, advisors, brands, researchers, and policymakers to assess, understand, engage, and transact with the cannabis industry and its consumers. You can check them out at newfrontierdata.com. And mahalo to our other sponsors, Cannabis Media, Indiva Advisors, High Day, and MJ Unpacked. You can check out our show notes with links in the description for all of their websites, and be sure to thank them for supporting our show. Aloha, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Cannabis CMO. Sorry, I was already starting to talk about my other podcast. My name is Kaliko Castile. I'm the co-founder of Thunderstorm Strategies and the host and author here at Cannabis CMO, your go-to source for marketing tips and tricks and insights in the cannabis industry. Really excited about today's guest. There's been a lot of news popping in the industry, but also a lot of news popping at this gentleman's company as well that I want to get into a little bit later. But really excited to welcome Joe Hodas, the president of Wana Brands, to the show today. For most people who have been in the industry for any period of time, probably have heard Joe's name or seen him around. He was at Dixie Elixir, which was one of the largest companies very early on in the cannabis industry, and also has a very extensive background working for mainstream brands before he came into the cannabis industry. So really looking forward to get into the insights and the experiences that he's learned both in the cannabis industry and beforehand, and then also getting some of his thoughts about some of the future stuff that's going to be happening with the big news that just came out of the Biden administration this week, that the DEA is planning on taking HHS's recommendation and rescheduling to Schedule 3, which will have some big implications for the marketing side of the cannabis industry. So we'll get into that a little bit during the show here, but Joe, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kaliko. Great to be here. Good to see you. I think we get to see each other every now and again, every couple of years. So I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess let's jump into the most newsworthy thing right now. Literally just 2 days ago, we got the news from the Biden administration that they are going to be taking the recommendation of HHS, and the DEA is going to accept that recommendation and going to be moving cannabis from a Schedule 1 drug to a Schedule 3 drug. For folks who may not have been following this very closely, cannabis has always been what's called a Schedule 1 drug, meaning it's the most restrictive category under the Controlled Substances Act. It's in the same category currently before this reschedule as heroin, LSD, methamphetamines, and other drugs people generally think are pretty hard drugs. And then now we're going to move into Schedule 3, which puts it in the same category as anabolic steroids, ketamine, and some other drugs, a little bit more restrictive than things like Xanax and Valium. But the big news for the cannabis industry specifically, and why I want to talk with Joe about it here, is that it's going to eliminate what's called 280E, this IRS provision from a tax code written back in the 80s to stop a cocaine dealer from writing off his yacht on his taxes. It has always been applied to every other Schedule I drug, including cannabis. So people who are at the retail level and everywhere throughout the supply chain are subject to 280E, some in more ways than others. But basically means that some of these companies were paying upwards of a 70+% tax rate at the federal level, even while cannabis was illegal. So I know, Joe, you've been at some large companies. You're at a large company right now that's expanding nationally and internationally, I'd imagine. Can you talk to us a little bit about what 280E has meant to businesses up to this point and what this change can mean specifically for marketers?
Yeah, so great intro to that, and I think one of the most important parts of it that you said from an understanding it standpoint is it does affect different parts of the industry differently. And so, real quick primer. And first of all, I'm not a tax guy, right? So I'm probably not an authority to speak on it. But what I'll tell you is that for manufacturers like Wana or Dixie, as you mentioned earlier, it's not quite as onerous because we're allowed to deduct what are called cost of goods sold. So we make a product. There are costs, labor, packaging, ingredients that go into that product. That's the cost of goods sold. As a business, we're able to deduct that normally just as any other business would. Now, there are other parts of our business that we can't deduct in quite the same way. But my point in saying that is that 280E affects cultivators and retail a lot more than it affects manufacturers. However, the upside and what you're talking about too is just the overall effect on the industry. And so what that means is that for a couple things. One, right now, AR, accounts receivable, big issue for most cannabis companies. Anywhere in that supply chain that you exist, someone's not paying you timely because they don't have the cash flow, because they're subject to 280E and their dollars are tied up in paying the IRS, or they owe back taxes or whatever it might be. And so it's going to just overall, I think, give us a better and more healthy business environment in which to function so that we're not constantly chasing down bad debt, which is important because that bad debt for smaller companies that can't withstand that, can be their death knell, right? That can mean the end of a company if they can't collect the dollars that are due to them. So there's that piece of it. Along with that comes what I think you're also referring to, which is what are the additional dollars? We're not paying the IRS these, hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes. And by the way, to be clear, we will still pay taxes, just not at that ridiculously inflated rate. Those dollars are going to get reinvested back into the companies. And I think one of the ways that I think those dollars will go back in is marketing. It's been, marketing, as you well know, is traditionally one of those things that if there's a tight budget, it's easy to cut, right? Like, oh, we're just going to cut back on marketing. Now, ask any marketer, they'll tell you that's a terrible idea, right? And that's just going to, exacerbate your woes as a company. But it's an easy line item to cut, right? So I am hopeful, and I believe that it's going to happen in the reverse, where as those dollars are a little bit more stable and they flow back into companies, they can be applied towards marketing and expanding brand presence for different companies.
Well, I mean, I think that's super. I think as somebody who's been in this industry for quite some time, started in the movement in 2011 to now, I think thinking about this historic nature is a big deal, right? And I think I've both ran a dispensary. I've been, I've worked at a couple of trade associations that worked on this issue, and I think talking to a lot of operators about how 280E has really held them back from realizing their potential as a business and just purely breaking even for many people, right? I think that it is going to be a different world for a lot of people. So I definitely agree that that's going to be huge. I know when we were at MJ BizCon last year, I know you were a part of the Cannabis Marketing Association's sort of like day-long summit that they had there. And one of the things that Lisa had brought up during her session was that they were basically looking at a Gartner report that said that, like, in the mainstream industries, that they spend roughly 9% of their overall gross revenue for the year on marketing, compared to cannabis. When they did a recent study for, I think it was CMA that actually did it, it showed that it was 0.5% to 1%, right? So thinking about like what that gap is between that 0.5 to 1% to like 9%, maybe we don't get all the way to 9, but even thinking that you could double up or triple up seems like a huge jump from what we're seeing right now.
Absolutely huge. And I think that the benefit for those who spend those dollars wisely and do it in a smart way, the benefit to the industry and to these individual companies is that it allows us to be more professional, more, like real brands, and get our message in front of the right people in the right places in the right ways. And I think that one of the challenges we face right now as an industry, and I'm not telling you something you don't know, but it's just a lack of recognition. I mean, even funny side note, even the announcement about Schedule 3, for us, huge deal, historic deal, right? I was with some folks last night. They described it as the largest change in drug policy in our lifetime, right? But that's a pretty strong statement. But I asked my wife, my daughter, and my son, I said, "Did you see the news today?" They're like, "No, what news? What happened?"
Absolutely.
I was like, how could you not know this, right? So my point in saying that is that we still have so much work to do to get information out, to get it in front of people, to help. I hate destigmatize is not the right word. I don't think that there's people running around the streets bad mouthing cannabis. There are, but it's not the majority, right? We know the majority of people are in favor of legalization, but we are not. We haven't done ourselves we've done ourselves a disservice by not being more visible, investing in things like studies and information that can be really helpful to the consumer. That's all generally falling underneath the marketing budget. So I'm excited about that potential to really elevate the industry in the eyes of the consumer and the patient.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that consumer education is really important because I think, really comes down to at the most part right now that it's bud tenders doing a lot of that education, right? And
Yeah.
are those bud tenders in a position to actually do some of that education? Are they getting the training necessary to be able to explain how different terpenes interact in different ways, how people can be getting relief from different stuff? Is whole plant extract different from distillate or so on and so forth, right? Can you talk to me a little bit about how Wana goes about sort of like doing educating for the consumers and maybe for bud tenders and your sort of retail partners? Like, what does that look like when you're not fully in control always to go direct to consumer? So you have to have some of those partners actually help get your stuff across to a consumer.
It's Kaliko. It's hard, man. And I'm going to say probably a few things that hopefully I'm not being offensive to people, but the bud tender is in many ways a gatekeeper in the store. I use the percentage. It's not a scientific number, but like 70% of the purchasing decision is influenced by the bud tender. There are very smart bud tenders. There are bud tenders that, just like any other industry, they're just doing it for a job to make quick buck. There are others that are doing it for the love of the plant, their own personal love of the plant. There's a million different reasons, right? So to be able to get our information across to the bud tender, who also, by the way, is very transient, and I don't mean that pejoratively. I mean that they just will go from store to store, they'll come into the industry and out of the industry. To get that information across in a way that is compelling, that they can remember, that they, as they're being educated by 100 different brands, it is really, really hard. And so it's this conundrum of 70% of the decision is influenced by the bud tender, and I have a really hard time getting across to all of the bud tenders all of our messages in a way that they can digest, in a way that they're going to repeat back, and then layer on top of that, they're getting incented by different brands. They respond pretty strongly to free product and swag and things like that. So there's all these other mitigating factors that maybe take their attention away. By the way, the dispensary as well is pushing it. So if they have a special that week, you may be a better product for a consumer, but if something's on special, that bud tender's likely going to go, well, this product is $5 off this week. This is the one you want, right? Then all my education, even if they understand it and know it, kind of goes out the window. So it's hard. So that's my complaining segment of my answer.
I think that's like a reality check for people, right? Because like it's tough out there. Like you said, like there's so many brands that are coming into a store every day. Like those bud tenders have so many SKUs to educate themselves on, right? Because we do have to put ourselves in the sort of mind of the bud tender sometimes. Like what are they having to deal with? Like you said, what are the pressures that they're having from other companies? And then I think, frankly, I'll just sort of give Wana some love here. Like when I was working for NCIA and going to the office in Denver all the time back in the day, like the staff loved Wana, and they like without any prompt would always be talking about how awesome these gummies were, right? And so like I think that it also speaks to, for a lot of marketers, that it's just helpful when you have a really good product, right? And like that's something that speaks for itself. And like there is no amount of educating you can do that makes up for something that just hits for people, right?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I was on a different marketing association panel actually about 6 months ago. And one of the things I talked about was, that giving people a sense that brand goes far beyond the logo, the look and feel, the education materials. It is the product, it's the experience, it's how my team and our teams interact with the partners and companies that we work with. All of that is brand, and that's to our benefit because we have such a great team that treat people with respect and come, from a place of real passion and passion for our mission, which is to enhance people's lives. And so that comes across in every interaction. That's how one of the ways in which we kind of cross that issue of the bud tender training and education is by engendering a level of mutual respect. and creating an environment that allows them to feel good about representing our product and recommending our product to the consumer.
Yes, I appreciate that. And I'm like, one of the things I wanted to sort of touch on a little bit is like, given that you guys started in Colorado, but now have massively expanded. You guys had a big publicized deal a couple of years ago. Forget what company was with. Forgive me on that. But I think the other thing was really, thank you, Canopy. And then there was a really big news just recently that Nancy Whiteman, the CEO and the founder of Wana, is now planning on stepping away and is operating or executing a transition plan or a succession plan that has you now coming to the helm and leading the brand. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the evolution of Wana from being sort of a small one state operator to being something that's now, likely, especially with the Schedule 3 news and sort of the expansion of this stuff, going to be a national household brand very soon, likely before many others get a chance to get out there?
Yeah, happy to talk about that, and thank you. First of all, I've run out of the fingers I used to count states with, because we've gotten far more than 10 at this point. So we're actually in about 18 states plus Canada plus Switzerland, to the point of international. We just announced that Switzerland is a fascinating situation. It's kind of like this sleeper country that has a quasi adult use situation, but we could spend a long time talking about that, so I won't get too deep into it. But it's very, very interesting. So the expansion piece is a huge part of our strategy. And it's also, what's nice is that it really goes well with our mission of enhancing people's lives. Our intent is to get our products to as many people as we possibly can, because we believe that we create products that benefit people, can help them live better lives, whether it's adult use, recreational, whether it's our Optimals line. So all those products, it's our deeply felt mission to get those to as many people as we can. So the state by state expansion is critically important, and it's going to continue. I think we're at a point now where the available states in terms of where we could expand into and what those opportunities look like has definitely dwindled, right? Because there's fewer and fewer states left to come online in adult use. But we have like Ohio this summer will be flipping to adult use. Florida will be voting in November. Seems pretty positive that'll flip. So there'll be more of that kind of transition over the next couple of years. But moving from the marketing role to now heading up the company is it's an interesting challenge. It was an interesting choice on Nancy's part. When this all got posted on LinkedIn, Brett Puffenberger, who I don't know him personally, we just have that LinkedIn relationship, right? But he posted something about how it was a big deal that a marketer moved into that role, and I hadn't really thought about it that way before. But I was like, well, I guess it is kind of a little bit different than a lot of cannabis companies. But where it was smart on Nancy's part is she understands and she knows full well it's the brand, right? It's Wana, the brand, that is important. And I am someone who helped for the last 4 years, architect that, but also who understands it inside and out, understands brand. So it made perfect sense in her mind to say, okay, well, you're a good person to be able to take that over, because it's always going to be front and center for us.
Yeah, I agree with what Brett had said there, because I actually, in the Cannabis CMO newsletter, as a reminder, folks can go to CannabisCMO.substack.com to subscribe. But a few weeks ago, I guess like probably a month ago now, we had covered this story that Starbucks had eliminated their CMO role, but they had actually upgraded their CMO to the head of the company, to their CEO role, right? So they had eliminated that chief marketing officer role, but basically rolled the person who was doing all the marketing up to lead the company, right? And so I do think that this is an interesting, I wouldn't say trend, but like something that it seems like it's something that companies are starting to explore. And I do think it's really interesting for folks who are coming up in the marketing world, who, like you said, are architecting brands, protecting brands, sort of building brands, growing them. I think, to your point earlier, sometimes those same people are the easy ones to cut, right? Or it's their team that's getting cut. It's like, it's those folks that, like, maybe just from a budgetary perspective is not getting as much respect as they maybe deserve in terms of like helping the company grow, right? Without having a marketing plan that's tied to a sales strategy, it's really hard to have a profitable company, right? But I do think like seeing you be able to move into this role is really awesome for cannabis companies as well, because I think it's really important in the sort of next phase of the industry that cannabis operators, and specifically, larger players, start to understand that marketing really is the lifeblood of keeping things alive. And when you start to chop at that, or at least not, I think even more importantly, give marketers a seat at the table for the strategy part, that's like something that's critical for the survival of these companies.
I was just going to say that I think that and I did comment in that thread about this, but I think marketers who think only in this box of marketing, even if they feel like they're pushing that box and the boundaries out, if they're only thinking about marketing, they're probably not doing a good job for the company or for the brand, and also probably wouldn't be considered when you think about budgets and who ascends into what roles, because you have to have a well-rounded view. So a marketer should be working with their sales team, should be working with their CFO to understand the budgets and make sure that they're not going over budget and in fact come in under budget maybe, right? So what are the ways that we as marketers can get our seat at the table and demonstrate our value, not just within the marketing context, but on the business impact overall? That's how we secure our spot.
Yeah, no. Well, first off, congratulations for the upgrade. I think
Thank you.
that this is really exciting, not only for Wana, but I think for the industry. And I'm pumped for Nancy too, because it's been an amazing story. And I know she's got the Wana Brands Foundation that she's still leading and does
Yeah.
some awesome work. And obviously, I was a president of the Minority Cannabis Business Association, which has been a recipient of Wana Brands Foundation love. So I really do appreciate the work that Nancy and the whole team has done there over the years.
It's so awesome, and it's so great that I get to be at least ancillary, next to that, because never did I think, 10, 15 years ago when I started into this industry, that someone as generous as Nancy would step up and say, I'm going to create a $50 million foundation, and we're going to start funding these really important projects all around the world. And it's been amazing to be part of that. So
I would tell people, if you're listening, to go check out Wana Brands Foundation. Just Google it and see some of the work that they are doing, because I do think it is amazing. And honestly, it's a really great example of somebody who's doing well and putting their money where their mouth is, in terms of like
100%.
stepping up to what they say that they want to do. And I think that's unfortunately too rare in this industry. So big ups to Nancy for the work she's doing, and definitely appreciate that.
Yes.
One of the things I want to sort of talk about, one is we've kind of think about the future of the industry. One of the things that I'm like starting to learn a lot about, because on the political side of Thunderstorm Strategies work, we're partnering with some teams that are building AI tools. So I'm really interested in AI and how that's going to affect marketers going forward. Literally before we got on the call today, I was opened up Instagram, and OpenAI had put out this post where they just commissioned their very first music video made entirely out of Sora, their video AI, right?
Wow.
And it's pretty good. I mean, it's like, if you didn't know it was AI, it would just look like kind of a trippy music video, right? And so, I do think, like, thinking about from the marketer's perspective, whether it's like efficiency gains or whether it's actually like helping to actually take on some of these projects. I'm curious how you think about AI when it comes to marketing, and then specifically to cannabis, but just more generally, like how are you thinking about AI right now?
Well, I think you kind of just hit the nail on the head for me as of today, which is to create greater efficiencies. So I am not yet at the point where I believe that AI can replace anyone that I have on my team, but I do think it can make them more efficient, and in many cases provide potentially content or ideas or thoughts that they weren't able to have themselves, right? So you're expanding that one brain to multiple brains simultaneously. But I think for marketers, the opportunity now is, as we've seen with many phases of technological development, whether it's, MP3s back in the day for the music industry, or the internet. If you put your head in the sand, you're like, I'm not going to pay attention to this because I don't want to risk losing my job. That mentality, that doesn't work, right? So you need to embrace it, learn it, make it your friend, so that you become the owner of that power, not who it's being done to, so to speak. And then you can figure out how to harness it and leverage it in ways that help make you look better, right? Help your marketing efforts become more impactful, and so you become the human element to the AI, because not everyone's going to become an expert, right? We know that. Leadership roles, they're busy running the business, and maybe they'll look at AI in terms of their efficiency, but they're gonna count on you as the marketer to say, this is how I'm using AI. This is the benefit to it. So don't be afraid of it. Don't run away from it. Embrace it and figure out how to harness it. Is my suggestion.
And yeah, I think that's excellent. I think that we definitely need to be in educating mode right now, and quickly, right? Because like Sora as a concept for OpenAI, for folks that aren't paying attention, like OpenAI is one of the larger AI companies out there. They are the ones that put out ChatGPT, and if you're not using it yet, you're behind, and you should go set up an account right now. And it's worth the $20 a month to get the ChatGPT 4 version. It also gives you access to their DALL-E, which is their image generation AI function. And then now this Sora is like going to be cinema, whatever. It's going to be cinema level quality video made entirely from AI. And like, it's still very early on, not released to the public. But I think if you don't understand how these technologies work, you're not going to understand the evolutions of these technology, right? Because we're still very much in the early phase. Like ChatGPT came out like just over a year ago, right? And I think like the how quickly we've jumped to where we are now is fascinating. And if you hadn't paid attention over the last year, you're waking up wondering what the hell is going on. So I do think it is really important for you to start becoming a practitioner and figuring out how can you at least start with the efficiency gains, right? One of the things I've been teaching clients on doing is like just using it to help build out a content calendar. One of the hardest things I think for a lot of people who are thinking about like building out content is like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to post one time a day for 30 days, right? And I'm like, well, at least if you can use ChatGPT to build a structure out, then you can put the meat on the bones of actually making sure that you understand like that what you're putting out is good quality stuff, right?
Yeah.
But you can use the structural sort of like thinking brain of ChatGPT to get you to something that you can't actually put your hands on. And even that might save you a half hour of just brainstorming when you can let the brainstorm happen there and then come in and be taking that a lot farther, right?
Yep. And then if you apply that sort of that mentality of at least save a half hour here, half hour there, help you get organized, think about, exponentially compounded growth, like what that means. What do you do with those extra half hours and what could you be doing better as a result? And, there's just a lot of, it frees up a lot of potential firepower, excuse me, in terms of your marketing prowess.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm curious, like aside from AI, what are some other maybe technologies, whether it's like, advertising platforms that are maybe in the cannabis industry or MarTech things that are, well, that's weird. I didn't realize that we still have that on StreamYard, MarTech stuff going on. Like what are just some things that technology or things that excite you about the future of marketing in cannabis right now?
So, I mean, at this point, I wouldn't say that there's a ton of things that really excite me about cannabis marketing specifically. And I'll tell you the challenge that we've always had as a brand. I mean, for retail, it's a little more clear cut in terms of use of digital channels to drive traffic and be able to track that through to conversion. As a brand, I've always had to just use digital as an awareness tool, which is great. And we can use some GA4 data to say like, oh, we drove 5,000 visits to the website, and that's great, or we had an email capture, but I'm not really driving revenue in a traditional e-commerce format, which is what a lot of the digital channels have been built for. So the problem that I have is that so many of the the cannabis specific programmatic ad platforms, they want to tell you that like, oh, we drove a 150x ROI because these 1,000 people saw our ads and then they went into a store and they bought product. It's so rudimentary and so like almost insulting to hear almost across the board all these companies telling me like, oh, we drove X percent of growth of revenue at this store, when I know for a fact these are people that were visiting the store anyway. I still don't know if they bought Wana product, frankly, and it's really, really basic right now, and it's partly the technology, it's partly the nature of our industry and of brands. But long story short, some platforms, and we've been using iHeartChain to decent effect with some of what they're doing within their network, but it's limited, right? Because I'm only able to do it to iHeartChain stores, but I can track through, someone who saw the ad on their platform, purchased the product, and then actually, went in and paid for that product. In addition to which, one of the things they unlocked, which I think is a big one, and I think there's a lot of future potential for, is they have Jane Gold, which allows me to then offer discounts or promos directly to a consumer. To the point of our earlier conversation about Budtenders, I'm able to kind of directly say to them, hey, I can give you $5 cash back on this product, for a limited period of time. And so that allows me to have a little more direct contact with the consumer. That's exciting. I think I'm seeing some new platforms that are more data aggregators, which is something that we desperately need. I mean, we're in a weird place. We're not sophisticated enough that we can use these big, massive platforms. We don't even have people that really can fully understand them to utilize them. But on the other hand, we have no ability to kind of triangulate all these various data points that we have. So I'm excited to see some companies coming in to kind of put their arms around all that and say, okay, here's your revenue in this state with this product, and you did X, Y, and Z with this product in the market, and be able to kind of put all that data together and say, all right, you're moving in the right direction or not.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating point in terms of like thinking about the current state and like technology kind of lacking, the data kind of lacking. But I think it's really interesting that you bring up and I appreciate you bringing a specific example of Jane up, because I think that, even that closed loop system that you were talking about, the ability to track it all the way through is super helpful for you to actually get real data. But then when you start to think about all the markets you're in and the fact that you don't have a national way to do that across all of your SKUs, I can imagine how frustrating that is to not be able to actually get a direct sense of what your ROI is when you're making these spends.
Yeah. So everything is brand awareness. And I think it's important. You have to have someone who understands marketing, and Nancy actually was a marketer, so she understands this as well, who, can look at this and say, okay, I see where we've got a lot of great brand awareness, so we can measure that with surveys and things, right? And the presumption is that's trickling down to some level of conversion so that people walk into a store understanding or knowing about Wana. But hard data to be able to track that and demonstrate that ROI, if you have someone particularly that is data oriented and doesn't necessarily trust or believe in marketing, that's where we get into trouble.
Cool. That's super helpful. And understanding where you're thinking about how digital is mostly an awareness tool, and then you have some of these platforms where you're trying to make a direct sort of spend or investment on it. How does Wana think about marketing in terms of where it places its budget when you're setting a budget for the year? How are you kind of allocating that in terms of direct spends and ad spends when things are kind of tough in general for this industry versus brand awareness things versus sponsorships of events? How do you think about allocating sort of your marketing budget on a yearly basis?
Well, we look at it really in terms of there's a marketing term of omni-channel, right? Omni-channel marketing. Omni-channel would imply that all things are working simultaneously together. We are omni-channel, but they're all in a silo, right? So we have some budget dedicated to digital. We have some local store marketing dollars. So we're putting a lot of dollars into point of sale. We know that swag is always the biggest part of our marketing budget because it just works in this industry. It's a barter system, right? So I know I can curry influence and favor with folks and Budtenders in particular when we have really great swag. And so that's actually one of the things that we're known for. We have really, really great swag that people love. And it seems, silly. I've been on panels outside of the industry, like e-commerce panels where I talk about our biggest line item is swag. And everyone's like, what? That doesn't make sense, but that's where we're at. So that's still an important part of the mix for us. And then right now I'm trying to find the balance between this, we're in 18 states plus Canada and all that good stuff, right? That's approaching national brand level, but we don't really have platforms that support national branding because the national branding is only beneficial if I can then drive it down from a local standpoint to store level purchases. So the balance between the local store marketing and the national branding is really where I'm struggling a little bit right now. We as a company to kind of figure out what is that balance.
Yeah, that's super helpful insights there because I think you're talking about merch as being a number one line item. I think that's counterintuitive probably for a lot of people, but I think has anybody ever heard of cookies? Right? It's
no,
they built an entire brand on merch, right? It was a clothing brand and a lifestyle brand before it was able to make the legal flip into the cannabis market. So I think it is a test case and a use case that people should be thinking when you have high quality stuff that people want to wear, they're walking billboards. That is something that when you're talking about not being able to do direct paid ads on Meta or, maybe on YouTube or some of these other places you can get around it, but it's really hard to reach a lot of these people that if you're just going to an event and handing out a bunch of swag and people are out carrying it around and walking around with it, people are seeing it. And then they're also mostly taking pictures of it, putting it on their Instagram. You're setting up ambassadors to go out and push your brand. And all you had to do is give them a free t-shirt or hat or whatever the cool thing is. Right. But I'd also think thinking about branding, exclusive sort of merch items. Right. And so that hey, go to this partner today between these hours and the first 50 people are going to get this exclusive merch item, right? I think that's something that once again you're driving people to take action to buy your product, but then the whole point of it is because they want this limited item, right? So I think once again maybe counterintuitive for a lot of folks, but also makes plenty of sense in a space when consumers talking to other consumers is the best way you can kind of get the word out.
Yeah, and you brought up something interesting too, is the fact that it's kind of a little bit of a loophole, right? And so in so many states, the rules are even more restrictive than in other states. And so our point of sale in a store can be only, limited to X, Y, or Z, and it has to have this kind of disclaimatory language on it, even though it's in a cannabis store, people shopping for cannabis, we still have to follow all these regs. But with swag and with hats and t-shirts, whatever, generally there's not a lot of rules around it. So it's a loophole, which is kind of cool. I like it. But the point is, I think some companies just look at it as, all right, if I'm giving away a free t-shirt, can I get a $5 t-shirt with a single color print of my logo on it? You can, but I think that's not the best path forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was looking at because I have a client in New Jersey right now, and one of the rules that they have is, you obviously can't give away free product, right? So to your point about like not being able to do things that in the traditional, and I mean traditional legacy side of things, you could very much give somebody a little taste of your thing and they'll be able to come back, right? But in the legal regulated place, that's not really the case, but you can kind of give out swag and stuff like that. So I think that is an important thing for people to be thinking about that as they're starting to build brand and just trying to figure out ways to become, I don't want to say viral, but a part of a community and like starting to actually spread and just diffuse throughout the people sort of in your local area.
Yep, for sure.
Well, Joe, I really appreciate you joining us. I know we got a little bit of time left up. So one of these like last questions I really want to ask you is really kind of focus around people who are just getting into the industry, right? Like obviously there's a lot of us who've been in it for quite some time, but the market is still expanding. There every day are people who are trying to get into this industry and start a cannabis brand. Now given sort of your experience, having worked at Dixie, worked at Wana, and have worked in really high level positions for big companies, what would be some of like sort of advice that you would give to some new entrepreneurs or new marketers getting into the industry about like, how they can be taking maybe some of the lessons learned from you and not recreating the wheel, but, kind of starting off, with hitting the ground running?
Well, for one thing is you have to, and this is probably not revolutionary suggestions, but, you have to be flexible and patient. I like to describe the cannabis industry as there's this inner wheel and an outer wheel. The outer wheel is moving super, super slow, and the inner wheel is going like you're on a hamster wheel, like 100 miles an hour. And it's incongruous, the two, right, going together. You have to get yourself used to that, like this constant feeling of pressure, but also knowing everything is moving really slow on the outside wheel is hard. So being flexible, being patient, and being scrappy. And I think scrappy sometimes is translated as, I don't have any budget, so I have to figure out how to do this without dollars. That's part of it, right? But scrappy also means the mindset of saying, if I hit a wall, what's the way around it, or over it, or under it, or there's so many ways to approach a wall. Keeping that in mind, that you don't just get to say, well, I can't go that way, let's figure out something else. There's always, in my experience, there's always a way. If you think about it long enough and hard enough, you can get around that wall. And so I think that's you have to have that internal gravitas to know that you can push through it. And I think a lot of people get into the industry who are marketers, maybe from other industries, and they think of cannabis as this exciting new frontier, and I'll be able to, I think a lot of people come to it with ego, saying like, I'll be able to teach them how to be professional marketers. I'll help, elevate the industry. And unfortunately, first of all, that's not what the industry needs. There are plenty of smart marketers. We don't need your intelligence to come in and help us be better, because we're already good marketers and we know our industry. And I think furthermore, that sets you up for failure by not respecting the path that's already been blazed, but also the fact that it doesn't take someone who knows how to spend a $100 million budget in TV advertising to improve marketing for the cannabis industry, because that's not what we do. Right. And so it's a completely different skill set. I think a lot of marketers pride themselves on those large budgets and the ability to spend dollars. That's not what we need in this industry today. Maybe 10, 15 years from now, I don't know. But today we need people who know how to be scrappy, like I said, who have patience and perseverance, and who have a respect for the plant and for the industry to come in and help.
Yeah, I think that's great perspective. I think as somebody who works like on the political side of things, I think about marketing in the cannabis industry a lot like running campaigns, right? Like it's very grassroots, it's very hand-to-hand combat, and it's very unsexy, right? You were sometime in a room talking to a couple of people trying to move the needle forward, right? And I think like you're willing to show up to any community event that's going to get you in front of some people. So I think that like that is for people who are used to sitting in a boardroom or sitting in these like really nice environments and just kind of shot calling that like this is not necessarily that industry, that sometimes the shot caller still got to be on the street working the corner, right? And I think that like that's something that that's a mindset that for folks coming from other industries isn't always intuitive for them.
Yeah, I'd say if you don't leave a meeting, not maybe within your own company, but a meeting in the industry, at least once a quarter, shaking your head, going like, "What the? I don't understand what just happened or what I just heard." You're probably not out there enough, right? Because that should happen to you pretty regularly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Joe, I really appreciate you making some time for us, especially on a very busy week with all the news going on. Appreciate you sharing your perspective about sort of the future of the industry, but also giving us some of your wisdom of the lessons learned over the years here. Any other sort of takeaways for folks as they're sort of thinking about kind of like 2024? It's an election year, like kind of like, I know you talked about this outer wheel moving slow, this inner wheel moving quickly, but it does seem like even the outer wheel is starting to move a little bit quicker. So, what are sort of your hopes for maybe over the next year here for the industry?
Yeah, it is starting to move a little more quickly. I think it remains to be seen the impact of Schedule 3 in terms of the overall perception. Does it move legalization forward more quickly? Is there a political benefit to it? Because I think, legalization as a whole is just hung up in so many other issues that aren't even related to cannabis. We get tacked on to different bills and, so there's so much going on that we just don't have control over. I'm hopeful that, that it helps and it moves things forward. That said, because of all of the changes, even from Schedule 3 that are about to occur, if you're not talking about it, if you're not thinking strategically about how to kind of move into this new reality of a potentially different schedule, more dollars coming in, 280E tax going away, and what you do with those dollars, you're probably not thinking hard enough about it because there will be impacts, right? So being prepared for that, being nimble, being patient, because again, to the wheel analogy, yes, it's moving faster. It still moves slow. We all want it to happen tomorrow. There's a whole comment period, which, by the way, is important for everyone to note. This comment period, it's not a slam dunk. This is not done, even though the language reads like it is. The folks who are closest to it that I talk to are telling me, like, we have got to be loud. We have to have thousands upon thousands of letters and doctor's notes and voices saying this is the right thing to do, and here's my experience, and here's why, here's the data, here's the study. So it's not a time to just sit back and say, oh, it's done, right? We still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It is time to step up more than ever, and definitely make sure that people are paying attention. Joe, I really appreciate your time. How can people get in touch with Wana Brands or follow along with what you guys got going on, or even where they can come find some of your product?
Yeah, well, first of all, we're in over 3,000 dispensaries across multiple states, but our website does a really great job of sorting by state and product types and all that good stuff. So that's at wanabrands.com. And all of our handles are at Wana Brands. So, check us out on Instagram, on LinkedIn. We are not currently on TikTok, but Instagram and LinkedIn are the two best places. And I'm at Joe Hodas as well.
Cool. Awesome. Well, it's great connecting with you and connecting with another fellow family man, and really appreciate all the work that you're doing in the industry. And for everyone else for tuning into another episode of Cannabis CMO, please do make sure you're subscribing to the weekly newsletter, CannabisCMO.substack.com. Look forward to doing some more of these interviews. And Joe, we'll catch you around hopefully at another event here in person soon, but looking forward to catching up and seeing how things are going during the transition.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me. Great to see you, and great to see you doing well.
Likewise. Appreciate you, brother. Thanks so much. Aloha, everybody.